Welcome, everyone, to the Services Ops Podcast. We are happy that you've decided to join us once again on this journey, digging into everything that is people, process, and technology of operating a successful services organization. This episode is really exciting. It's very near and dear to the hearts of people that work at and engage with Provis. It's about services quoting. It's about the services quoting process and the state that it is in today and the people, process, and technology that support the services quoting processes and its upcoming evolution. Right. And so we thought, what better than to interview Provis co-founder and CEO Mahesh Baxi, who is also a host of the Services Ops podcast, and really go through what services quoting is and why it matters. Mahesh, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Looking forward to this episode of our podcast.
Yeah, and we should, right? I think we all firmly believe that the time for services quoting attention is now. And there's some really compelling reasons why. Good business is just one of them. But really, there's macro factors pushing on the rise of services quoting and so many other things. So let's go ahead and set the stage. Mahesh, why don't you take us through services quoting? Right? What is it? Explain where it starts, where it ends, and let's start there.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great way to start this episode of podcast, Chris. So services quoting, if you think of the overall lead to cash process, right? Everyone understands how the lead generation happens, lead management happens. That ends up in the opportunity management, the forecast, all of that stuff. And then there's this big, wide lump or the void space, which is everyone moves to Excel spreadsheet. What are they doing in Excel spreadsheet? Because someone has to do what we are calling services quoting or generate a services proposal. And that process, 96% of the time happens on Excel spreadsheet. And then everything comes back magically in the form of your backend fulfillment systems, like a professional services automation, your invoicing, billing, all of those processes are automated. So there's this big void in terms of services quoting. And what is it? So if you think of any kind of services that the companies do, whether it's a consulting services, whether it's a professional services, asset-based services, pharmaceutical services, just any kind of services, the fundamental aspect of services quoting is the scope, right? The scope is the foundation for how you decide the price, the timeline, the resource mix, the location where you are going to deliver it from, the work breakdown structure of what services you are selling or how you want to structure them, all of that, everything is, based off of what we call the scoping. Now, so services quoting starts with scoping. Scoping could start with some sort of, scope discovery sessions with your prospect, where you go through a series of guided selling questions like, hey, how many approval processes do you have? How many integrations do you plan to do? And so on and so forth, right? And so scoping is the foundation, and that's the beginning of the overall services quoting journey. Once the scoping / kind of estimation is done after the guided selling, structured questions that you kind of do as part of your discovery sessions with the prospect, then obviously comes, okay, now I understand what's involved from a scope perspective. How do I price it? Now, unlike a typical product CPQ, which is a price waterfall model, in the services quoting, the pricing is a multi-dimensional in a sense that on one side you have work breakdown structure, all of your scope. Now on the other side, you have a resource role, the resource mix, the resource ramp to do all of those tasks, the dependencies in terms of how you're going to deliver the entire scope of your project, because there are certain things that has to be aligned and you cannot do like UAT before you have even done the configuration or development of your implementation, right? So there are all of those dependencies that you have to take care. And so it's a multi-dimensional impact when it comes to pricing in terms of how you are going to lay out the entire structure of your deal or known as the services quote. And in this entire process, it's not one person who is or persona who is doing this, right? It starts with the, sales persona, maybe depending on how your organization is set up, but it touches so many other personas in the sense that there is a sales, there is a pre-sales, there is a delivery sales, sales ops, the delivery folks, the solution architects, the project management, finance, from an approval standpoint. So there are so many different personas that touches what we call a deal making process for your services quoting, and which is where the collaboration across all of these personas in an effective automated manner, that complies with organizational guidelines for how you want to put your deal together, is an extremely important aspect. And so now if you combine all of this, right, the piece that's in the middle, which is starts after the opportunity is somewhat qualified, and now you can actually start doing the scope discovery, guided selling, put your estimate together, then go through the entire quoting process, which includes the pricing, which includes scenario modeling, which includes collaboration, approvals, there's SOW or proposal generation. So that entire process, automating that until when you are ready to kind of sign on the dotted line on your SOW or a proposal, is called services quoting process, right? And to a large extent, this services quoting process happens to be on Excel spreadsheets, even some of our enterprise customers that we have and prospects that we are talking to.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting from the technology perspective, right? Number one, first, the people. You mentioned a large swath of people, and a large swath of those people who are making services operations decisions, just like we're talking about here on this podcast, right? It's a very similar group of responsibility, which indicates a few really interesting things about services quoting. One, there's opportunity to really improve that as a process,
Yeah.
right? We talked about everybody knows how leads come in, everybody kind of knows how to deliver projects and the finances behind it. These are mature processes. These are mature technologies. These are defined role sets. And so when you look through your services organization and you see an important part of the process that isn't super well defined, that isn't super supported from a technology perspective, automation, if you can't think about parts of your services quoting process that is missing automation, you're missing something, right? So it just shows that why services quoting is really coming about these days. And something else that you called out too is the distinct difference between a product CPQ technology, if you will, and services quoting. I think probably for a long time, and one of the reasons why services quoting is coming up is people are starting to realize this price waterfall model that product CPQ gives you cannot be configured in a way like they hoped it would, right?
Yeah.
So if you were an early adopter in the services space and you're like, we're going to make this work, we're going to configure it, we're going to get it done, you're starting to realize right about now, it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and you're also happen to be, if you're one of these organizations that are realizing that right about now, and you're one of those organization or another organization that's saying these spreadsheets aren't working, all of these folks are starting to like make these realizations at the same exact time. Wait a minute, we've got this process in the middle of our sales motion
Yeah.
that is just kind of not great. We'll just say
Yeah.
not great.
It's
Um,
broken, it's disconnected. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Broken, disconnected, and so you want to make changes. And let's call out why, right? Let's talk about what this is. This process in and of itself hits some major pain points
Yeah.
at the business level. Lost revenue, margin erosion,
Yeah.
operating costs, inefficiencies from your process in general, lack of general visibility into the business. Let's talk a little bit about what that means for a business overall. Because I
Yeah.
think we have a tendency to get stuck in our lanes and sometimes you don't zoom out.
Yeah.
So let's get into that.
Yeah. I think so. If you think of a services quoting process, we talk about people, process, technology, right? And to a great extent, I mentioned 96% of the companies we talk to are running this process on Excel spreadsheet. Now, Excel spreadsheet is not an automation platform. It's not a software product. It's a tool, right? And yes, it's a great tool to an extent that gets you started on doing something, but it's not a tool that allows you to really, in a true sense, automate your process, right? So you have a process, and that process, is automated, or is that process is supported through Excel spreadsheet based macros and a bunch of tabs and stuff like that. But that by no means is a software platform or a software solution that allows you to really optimize your process or automate your process. Now,
Yeah.
and the reason this is a problem, Chris, is when we talk about services quoting process, it's a fairly complicated affair. I mean, I'll give you an example of one of our customers without necessarily naming the customer, but this customer has about 20 different types of services that they sell. Okay. So pay attention. 20 different types of services. Each of the services has different types of bundles or sub-services that they sell underneath it. In effect, there are more than 100 different types of services that they are selling to their customers. Now we talk about people. Now, if I'm a great salesperson, I know exactly how those 20 services needs to be sold, which ones to be sold. But if I'm not, I don't have the tribal knowledge, then I'm going to say, okay, well, here are the top 5 services, and this is the one I'm going to try and sell it. This is where you talked about lost revenue, or what we call I would like to call revenue maximization. If you have 20 services and there are sub-services underneath it, right? And if you're not organized enough to really have a guided selling without, people is important, but, do you want to rely on people's tribal knowledge, or do you want to put a guided selling process so that you have an accurate and consistent selling approach every time, no matter which region, no matter who does it, no matter which kind of customer you're going after, right? And it's a complicated affair. Now, that's one part of it. Now, think of 20 services that I'm trying to sell that may end up in a multi-month, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe, 10, 15, 20 resources over multi-year, all of that kind of stuff. It's not like, I generate a beautiful proposal out of that and put it in front of the customer and they're ready to sign. It doesn't work like that. In which case they're going to say, well, I don't have this much budget. What can we do? This is where, services CPQ or services quoting is fundamentally different from product CPQ. If I were to just extend discounting in a price waterfall model, that's much easier. Here, when you have to take 100K out of your overall proposal, yes, you can take 100K out by just extending a discount. What you are leaving on the table, or what you are ending up doing, is margin erosion, because you are actually compromising the margins for your highly sellable resources, types of resources, location of resources. You are actually giving into the scope that maybe you should, do it later, or maybe you should put it back on the customers, and all that kind of stuff. This is where our scenario modeling, comes in. So when you talk about maximizing your revenue, a guided selling, very methodical approach is one part of automation. The second is really, how do you optimize your margins so that you are looking at scope, you are looking at your work breakdown structure, you are looking at your resources, resource mix, resource locations, and look at where can you leverage, to still give that 100K discount that customer is looking for without really eroding your margins. And all of this is not possible on tools like Excel spreadsheet. This is where you need a software solution, a software platform, which allows you to not only automate the process, but allows you to really manipulate what you need to manipulate in a consistent, accurate manner that all of your sales teams, delivery teams, pre-sales teams can understand and operate with, right? So that's where the crux is, right? It's not as simple as, oh, I want to sell 5 resources and $100 each for 200 hours. That's not what we're talking about. Most customers have a fairly complex, nested set of services that they want to position and sell for them to be successful and for their customers to be successful. And this is where the current state of affair is on Excel spreadsheet is basically those customers are not able to maximize the revenue, and they are losing or eroding their margins, which is obviously in services business, as we all know, is extremely critical to
Not,
optimize the margins.
not good. Yeah, we want to protect those margins as much as possible. And I wonder, I think about what are some of the mechanisms services organizations use today to optimize their margins. And a lot of time, energy, and effort goes into how effectively and efficiently are you delivering the projects to your customers, right? So
Yeah.
you get it sold and they agree and like, okay, let's deliver. Let's get the best project managers we can get. Let's train them to be super efficient and let's make sure we deliver within whatever was sold. And hopefully we can increase our margins 0.5% or 1% or so. And I wonder how many services leaders or people who are in charge of services revenue are thinking about going further upstream and getting it right further upstream.
So I'm going to be bold enough and say how many services leaders are actually doing it. Probably the answer is zero.
Hmm.
How many of those are thinking about transforming this process
There
and
we go.
really understanding how acute this problem is? There are many. I mean, I run into a lot of services leaders and sales leaders who are constantly thinking about, how can they bridge this gap between, on one side you have the top line, the other side you have the bottom line, but you are constantly thinking of how do you keep improving your top line while you optimize your bottom line, and that's easier said than done. It's an
Yeah.
extremely complex and complicated affair, and so when you think of optimizing margins, right? I mean, on Excel spreadsheet, there's nothing anyone can do. I mean, when you are making a deal using Excel spreadsheet, once the deal is done, that Excel sheet is done. There is no reusability of that Excel spreadsheet or the data or the scenarios or the tabs that you have created. None of that stuff. Now, where the courageous leaders, as I like to call it, right? And there are so many courageous leaders out there, who are thinking to transform this important business process, is where the intersection of automating your process and AI and how AI can actually help you with that goal of maximizing your revenue and optimizing your margin comes in, right? So let me explain what that means. We keep talking about people, process, technology. This is where the technology obviously touches the people and process, but the technology comes in, which is first and foremost, Excel tool is not helping you acquire and organize the data in a meaningful way, right? And this is where the automated systems, the software solutions, software platforms come in, which is now you are actually on back of automation, you are starting to acquire and organize your data in a meaningful way where you can start applying a whole bunch of algorithms and AI technologies to start working in your favor. I'll give you an example. Let's say if you have done 100 deals and each of those deals were sold with 45% margin, right? When you're doing the 101st deal, as a salesperson, I would love for system to tell me that, hey, you have done 100 deals like this for this customer that you are working with, for this industry, for this size. Here are the 5 other services that you should include because this is what your peers have done. This is what customers need. This is going to help you maximize your revenue. And on the other hand, when I get to my scenario modeling, hey, you have a certain resource type and resource mix. By the way, one of the ways you can still keep your top line intact but optimize your margin is switch your resource locations or do discounting this way based on location or do discounting based on volumes or something of that sort, right? So this is the first level of the advantage of organizing and acquiring your data, right? As Jim Rohn said, every discipline effort has multiple rewards, and this is just the beginning. The first discipline effort is to acquire and organize your data.
Mhm.
The second one is now I've done 100 deals, I've executed 100 deals. I would love for system to come back and tell me that, hey, not only you are selling at 45% margin, but you're going to realize 33% margin. And not only that you are going to realize 33% margin, but here are the 4 places where you are going to have a disconnect based on 100 executions that you have done. And our recommendation is that either take this portion out of your scope, push it back onto the customer, or increase the scope or increase the number of hours for this type of scope, or change the resource mix and all that kind of stuff, right? So you are helping the system on back of acquiring and organizing the data. It's now analyzing everything and coming back and telling me, how can I maximize my revenue, optimize my margin, and making sure that my delivery risk is minimized based on all of the intersection of
Yeah.
the data and the manipulation of the data that I've done. This is where people process technology comes in. Now, as a people, if I'm a salesperson with all of this technology, I can actually stay focused on what I need to do best, which is build relationships with the customers, make sure that you are focused on selling and not focused on manipulating hundreds of cells in an Excel spreadsheet, right? That's not as a people what you should be doing. Process, because now it complies with your entire process, right from your guided selling all the way to approvals and all of that stuff. And now this technology is not only just helping you with the basics, it's actually coming back and saying what you should be doing, how you can make this deal better for you and for your customers, and get to the objectives and goals that you are looking to acquire.
Yeah. And if organizations get this right, they insert this technology in a meaningful way, or acquiring, organizing data in a meaningful way, and connecting it right to those front and back office systems like we talked about, your CRMs, your PSAs, your ERPs, all of a sudden there are other people that start to benefit as well, right?
Yeah.
Professional
Yeah.
services team,
And
you're
it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Like I said, I
exactly.
think there are all these leaders who are already thinking, and this is an acute problem
Yeah.
for most of the organizations. So it's a question of when these courageous leaders are going to take that step and come on the other side of the fence and really implement automated systems like what we do at Provis. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's going to be realization, right? Like it's going to be a win. It's going to be a when you fully realize the pain of your resource forecasting is going to be significantly diminished.
Yeah.
Right? It's when you fully realize that you are a proactive leader when it comes to generating revenue, protecting revenue for your organization. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, that's when people get really courageous and start going. But it takes a first leap, right? It takes a first step. And I think we like to say a lot of times, AI is it's here and it's coming, and there's lots of data that you need to be aware of, and there's lots of pre-work you need to do to set up your systems in a way to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
There's also this element of operational, just internal operational efficiency. And let's go back to spreadsheets and let's go back to internal operating systems. I like to think of this from an operational perspective as with a little sports analogy, no wasted steps, right? If you play any sports or you've ever seen it, it's all about the angles you take. And anytime there's a repetitive motion, like in basketball for free throws, you'll see some players like dribble the ball 2 times and they spin it 3 times and they put it around their back, or some players just dribble it and shoot it. And I bring that up because this is a repetitive motion that you want to have locked in. You don't want any variance. You want it to go in every single time.
Yeah.
And when you dribble twice to the side and then spin it in your hand and then dribble it again, each one of those are steps where you can potentially throw yourself off by half a degree. You can accidentally dribble it too hard and then you're a little bit off and you spin it a little bit too hard. And then all of a sudden, you've diminished your chances of making that shot just a little bit because you're not repeating exactly what it should be. And
Yeah.
same thing with your internal processes, right? On Excel, you are opening yourself up to, you've created a process around your process, naming conventions, who's in charge of updating this spreadsheet, where's the latest one, what's the memo line. These are all dribbles and spins that you're inserting into your process and opening yourself up to downstream margin erosion, revenue leakage. It sounds simplistic, it sounds kind of nitpicky, but from an operations perspective, take those out, take the extra things out,
Yeah.
and automate it as you go.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Your point on Chris. I mean, we talked about a bunch of challenges. The other one and these are all real challenges that leaders face, which is you talked about resource forecasting. You talked about revenue forecasting when it comes to services. It's not as simple as a revenue forecast, because when you are selling a product, you know what price you are selling at, what discount you are applying, and what revenue you are generating. In the services, it's not that simple, right? Because you do not recognize your revenue when you actually sign your SOW proposal. You have to really understand what you are delivering, what are your milestones, how many resources are being spent, how much time each month. And so then you have to project how much revenue you're potentially generating, either monthly, quarterly, or based on the milestones and all that stuff. And that's a very complex, complicated affair. And so when we talk about resource forecasting, again, that's something that, like I said, every discipline effort has multiple rewards. When you are actually acquiring and organizing your data in a systematic manner, you automatically start getting benefits of revenue forecast. Resource forecast is a completely different, that probably is another 1 hour of discussion
Yeah.
that we could go
Yeah.
through. But it's a massive challenge for delivery leaders, for sales leaders, for ops leaders, for finance, because I'm talking about enterprise customers which are doing large, massive, multi-year deals. In some cases, it consists of 500 to 5,000 people. Now, it's one thing to sell the deal. What you don't want right after selling the deal is to have the next call with the customer and say, "Oops, sorry, we don't have resources. We have to push out certain timelines and stuff like that." So everything has to be coordinated. You need to know if you are selling 50 resources and 10 of those are solution architects, how many of those 10 solution architects are going to be available at the time when you need it, which is where the entire detailing of how you sell and structure your services quoting comes through. So again, that's a completely different and long conversation, but those are real challenges that the services leaders are facing, and the only way to solve it is get off of spreadsheet. If you are not using BlackBerry, do not use Excel spreadsheets for your processes, right? If you're using BlackBerry, maybe you're allowed to use Excel spreadsheet, but if you're not, then move off of your Excel spreadsheet. And as you're moving off of Excel spreadsheet and working on acquiring and organizing your services coding data, this is where your next layer, or Gen 2, Gen 3, however we want to call it, comes in, which is now all of a sudden you are going to have AI technologies that will come in and start understanding how you are structuring the deals, how you are selling the deals, how you are executing the deals, bring all of that together and start giving you recommendations and predictions in terms of your win rate, your delivery risk, your resource mix and locations, where you can discount, how you can optimize margins, how you can maximize your revenue. All of that will start happening, which is the benefit of disciplined efforts.
Yeah. And let's really, really reiterate why we keep talking about data and why we keep talking about AI. And if you're on the fence at this point in time, 2024 State of Professional Services report from TSIA, one of their top recommendations is to start developing your perspective on where you're going to be incorporating AI into your services process, right? And there's different areas, different applications that you can start thinking about. And if you're not thinking about it now, if you're not making plans, you're immediately falling behind your peers. So if you haven't kind of gotten on that train yet, it's time to get on. Tickets are free. All it takes is courage, right? Um, and a precursor to that is the data. It is 100% your data. It needs to be connected. It needs to be organized. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting most likely with some kind of tool that has AI capabilities and promises, and you're going to spend the next year and a half fixing your data so the AI can read it and do something with it, right? So develop your perspective on your data now. Connect your data across the services process, services quoting process, across your entire services process. Connect that data, have it organized. And as you develop your perspective on AI, now all of a sudden you'll be ready and you'll go from a thinker to an early adopter to a leader.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Awesome. All right. Well, that was what we call an intense crash course in services quoting. Mahesh, this was great. I think our audience is going to really enjoy this. Key takeaways, everybody. Spreadsheets, they're not a quoting system. Get off of BlackBerry. Get off of your spreadsheets. As beautiful as they are, they're beautiful, but it's time to move on. And really embrace AI and figure out what you're going to do with AI here. If you can do those things in the next couple of weeks, really think about it, then all of a sudden you're going to be taking another steps toward being a proactive services leader. And that's what we want you to become. So let's wrap it up. We're all done here. Mahesh, any last words?
No, this is great. Looking forward to the next one.
All right. So we're going to wrap up this episode of the Services Ops Podcast. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow Provis on social media and go out and just enjoy being a services ops leader.